Welcome to We Chat Divorce, hosted by Karen Shalhoub, Legal Liaison, and Catherine Shanahan, CDFA. Each episode, we sit down with divorce professionals and industry experts to provide insights and frank discussions about real people, real situations, and real divorce to help you achieve your best life post-divorce. This episode of We Chat Divorce is brought to you by My Divorce Solution, offering divorce financial planning so clients can secure the divorce settlement they deserve. Visit mydivorcesolution.com to request access.
Welcome back to Divorce Explored, part of the We Chat Divorce podcast. I'm Karen Shalhoub, Legal Liaison and co-founder of My Divorce Solution. And I'm here with my co-founder, Catherine Shanahan, CDFA and Divorce Financial Specialist. Last episode, we introduced a concept that we call the financial clarity gap. It's the distance between what feels manageable in the moment and what you actually need long-term. And we walked through the 4 pillars of a verified financial picture: the full scope of your marital estate, what your assets are truly worth after taxes and liquidity, what life will actually cost post-divorce, and the long-term consequences of different settlement choices. So if you haven't heard part 1 yet, it's worth going back, but you can absolutely follow along here today. Because today we're tackling something that surprises a lot of people. What happens when the divorce is amicable? You'd think financial clarity would be less urgent when both people are cooperating. But in our experience, that's actually when some of the most significant financial mistakes can happen, quietly, with no one intending them. So today we're going to talk about why even cooperative divorces can get financially messy. And then we'll walk through our before you sign checklist, 6 practical steps you should have completed before agreeing to any terms. So Catherine, before we get into the patterns, can you set the stage? What does amicable actually protect people from? And what does it not protect them from?
I can certainly do that, but I don't want to forget to go back to something that you said earlier. So you said financial clarity gap, the distance between what feels manageable in the moment and what you actually need long term. I think that's a really important statement that you made, so I want to go back to that. But amicable really just means low conflict, right? You're getting along, you both don't want to go to court, and so you're going to try to work through this agreement with your attorneys, a mediator, amongst yourselves at the kitchen table. But it doesn't mean not having complete financial disclosure. You still need that to be amicable. Cooperative divorces still rely on both parties having accurate, verified information. Goodwill doesn't substitute for documentation. So you can trust your partner to give you information, but that doesn't mean that it should substitute having the documentation to verify it. So the mistake in amicable divorces are usually unintentional, which is exactly why they're so easy to miss. But if you don't mind, let's go back to that statement, because that distance between what feels manageable, what feels amicable in the moment, is not actually what you might need long term. So in the beginning, when divorce is initiated by either party, it's uncomfortable. You're not expecting it, or you have been talking about it for a while and it's still uncomfortable because now it's coming to fruition. So I think that period of time, that distance between making the statement you want a divorce until it actually happens long term, or what your long term needs is where you really have to focus on getting that information and getting that financial clarity that you need so that it can stay amicable. Because it's hard to do that because there's so many emotions in that time period.
Yes, and I feel that a lot of times when people approach this process amicably, whether they're getting a divorce or a postnuptial agreement, they don't fully realize that the dynamics of their marital relationship is changing while they're trying to negotiate. So the person who's always been the financial manager assumes that role in the divorce negotiations or the postnup or whatever they happen to be negotiating. So Catherine, can you talk about that a little bit? Because sometimes that's where it's not necessarily conflict, but where more uncomfortableness can arise because the non-financial manager is getting up to speed, having independent thoughts, questions that could seem contentious, but it's in the space of clarity. And often we have to have these conversations with the spouses to help them get on the same playing field, but also stay amicable. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great conversation because yes, you're used to your spouse who's taking care of the finances, and they're going to continue. They want to continue to do that until your divorce is finalized. Maybe a control factor. I'm not sure, but you now all of a sudden don't have trust. You trusted it during your marriage for the most part, but now it's clear that you do have an independent thought here, but you're afraid to voice it. And worse than that is you have third parties, your sister, your brother, your mother, your father, your attorney, your best friends, who now can't stand your spouse and start telling you things that they didn't like about him during your marriage that they never told you before. So now you definitely not trusting, and they're telling you to go after your spouse and get this, and they don't deserve that. So now you're trying to be amicable. You want to work with your spouse, but you have so many voices in your head. So how do you trust to move forward? You almost become paralyzed. And that's why people run to their attorneys a lot. Like, what am I supposed to do? And that's where you need to turn off so many external voices and just get the information that you need so that you can work with your spouse if possible, that you can make good decisions for yourself based on the data, not on everybody else's agenda for you, although their agenda is for you. They're trying to protect you, and they love you, and they're looking after you, but they don't really know your marriage. They don't really know the dynamics truly, and they don't really know how your finances look or what the impact to those decisions will be moving forward. So it's hard. It's really hard.
It is hard. And if you have a question about something, it's not helpful to not ask the question for fear of what the response may be or for the fear you may trigger a negative emotion. That's part of the development of a successful negotiation. Would you agree?
Oh, yes. A lot of times I always say, probably in every podcast, something to the effect of, asking a question is not questioning somebody. So although you're being amicable, it doesn't mean you don't get to ask questions. You should ask as many questions as you have to get the clarity that you need. You and I talk about this all the time. Mm-hmm. We look at things from a different viewpoint. I see it in my head, but I have no patience for the little details. Or I might know what an outcome or some solutions will look like in my head, and I don't know how to make it work operational wise. And you see it from the other viewpoint. You see it operational when it's in the operational standpoint. Your lens is very different. And oftentimes you and I as business partners get a little frustrated with each other because we're saying the same thing, but we're saying it so differently. And then after many conversations over the last 10 years, we'll sit back and we'll laugh because we'll say, oh my God, that's exactly what I was saying. But we just say it differently.
And because we come at it from different angles, right? It's common that you will see the outcome, but I need to know how it works. I need to know how it's going to develop. I need to know the plan. And so that's very common in a lot of relationships. One sees it, knows it like the back of their hand, and the other person just needs to know how it works, and not in disagreement, but in how they're going to process all of this moving forward. That's a great analogy. I love it.
Yeah. And it's true, and for us, we never have ego in the game when we came to business decisions, right? Mm-hmm. For us, developing my divorce solution has always been, what is the best result for the client going through the process? So if you believed in something more than I was against it, we would go with it. If it worked, great. It just improved our process. That's what we always wanted to do. So if you're in an amicable space with your spouse, both parties need to understand that the goal of that is to what is the best outcome for the family. Both of you have to compromise. And you also have to set ego aside a little bit, which is probably the hardest part to do, because ego sometimes is the right of one party to always be correct, So you have to set that aside, which is hard to do. And the only way to do it is base your decisions on the data, the facts, not the emotions.
And understand that difficult conversations are part of the process. Difficult conversations doesn't mean conflict or that you're not being amicable. So that's great. All right, so we're talking about our divorce is amicable, we get along, we're going to keep it simple. And that's genuinely wonderful. But here's what we see. Amicable does not protect you from financially sloppy. There's a few reasons why even collaborative, respectful, amicable divorces can produce expensive financial mistakes. So, Catherine, let's talk about those patterns that we see.
Well, one pattern is the pressure to be reasonable. In amicable divorces, people often tend not to push for complete financial disclosures because it feels like you're questioning your spouse. It feels like you're not trusting. It feels like you're trying to create conflict. And that's not the truth. It's your purpose is to be accurate. And again, I'm going to go back to making decisions based on the data, not on the emotions. Although emotions can be valuable when determining which assets and debts you don't want to keep, but you have to base everything on the actual data.
Right. And how often in these particular situations, these amicable situations, that we see a spouse, somebody coming to the table, intending to negotiate off of a spreadsheet?
Too often. Another pattern is the professional silos. Now, you're trying to work with your spouse, or you feel like you have a hold on some of the information, but your attorneys are really there to handle your legal rights and the strategy legally. They typically aren't building your financial inventories, your lifestyle analysis, or any scenario modeling for what options are best for you. So, know what you need your attorney for. You do need them. You need them to protect you legally. But you need to go back to them again based on the data and what your needs are and the impact to those decisions, and then let them help you protect you legally. Another pattern is the calm divorce. A calm divorce, it can be very sloppy financially. There's missing documents, there's misunderstood income, which is a huge one, and there's unrealistic housing cost needs. You don't really consider what it is to maintain that home moving forward. So although you're trying to be calm, don't be sloppy. Really know what the impact to your decisions will be. The other thing is, remember, amicable doesn't guarantee transparency, and you really need transparency for successful negotiations.
Okay, so let's talk about pattern 2, the professional silos. This is very important to unpack. So a traditional CDFA can provide valuable analysis, but many engagements are scoped to specific questions rather than a full start to finish verified system. So that is the purpose of the MDS financial portrait, what we have built at My Divorce Solution as the bridge between financial analysis and your ability to negotiate a marital settlement agreement. The financial discovery and settlement modeling layer that organizes, verifies, and analyzes the full financial picture before negotiations begin, so that all decisions are built on verified facts, not assumptions or rushed approximations. Clarity protects both people, Catherine. We say this over and over and over again, but it's important to keep saying. But let's talk about, why does financial clarity actually make amicable divorces smoother, not harder?
Well, it kind of brings you both back to a leveling playing field, right? So when both parties are working from the same verified facts, there's less room for suspicion and disagreement. And I think that's why I constantly say, I don't understand why it's not mandatory that people come through our process, because why do we need to pay 2 attorneys to collect the same data? It just doesn't make sense to me, logically speaking, right? So if we're all working on from the same place with the same verified facts, then we can make clear decisions without feeling like somebody's trying to screw over the other party or somebody's stealing money from somewhere, because you can't negotiate off of that. That's not a way to negotiate, because you don't trust any decisions you make, and that's the people that have remorse the next day, especially after mediation. Financial clarity also shortens the process because there's less back and forth over numbers. I mean, how many times when we have both spouses and they say, well, yeah, you can have the data. I don't know why it wasn't given to you. I supplied it. I don't know why you don't have it, right? So if we have that clarity, your process, you'll be able to make smarter decisions for yourself a lot quicker than you would just waiting for discovery. Which, and by the way, discovery comes in like the day before mediation, right?
Typically, when attorneys are tasked with obtaining it from each other. So that's very interesting, because I've been on, part of our process. If attorneys are involved, we get on a call with them to talk about everyone's role and how we're going to move this case forward. And it's not uncommon for me to hear from an attorney that family law is unique in that it's the only area of law where people are asked, where one spouse is asking another spouse for their own information and data and documents. It's unreal. But we also see a trend of attorneys willing to work with My Divorce Solution to say, all right, everybody use that process to gather the documents, verify the assets and debts, and then come back, and then we'll move forward. So that's really encouraging for us, because they realize that in order for people to be as successful as possible, we need to streamline the process and make it more transactional versus contentious. All right, so we're going to move on to what we call the before you sign checklists. Essentially, the before you negotiate checklist. 6 steps you should have worked through before you agree to any terms. So let's walk through this. Step 1, build the full inventory. Every asset, every debt, not just the highlights. Some people say, well, I have a separate account, or this one doesn't count, or this one has $3 in it. Disclose the full picture. So Catherine, let's talk about what is commonly missing when we first start to work with couples and or individual spouses.
A big one is prior retirement accounts, pensions, or even 401ks from prior employers. Oh, I remembered I worked for this company. Oh, I forgot. Or I don't have access to that. You can take the time to get the access to prior retirement plans. Actually, it's very important, because you could take the step to roll it over into an IRA before you would have to quadro it. But again, that's another conversation. A lot of restricted stock units and deferred compensations are overlooked or not accounted for.
Okay, step 2, verify with documentation. If a number can't be supported with a source document, it's a question. It's a statement, it's not a fact, so treat it accordingly. Step 3, build a lifestyle and cash flow picture based on actual spending, not memory. Typically, you do start out with estimations, but it's important that you can really own that information when talking about spousal support. So this is what tells you whether the agreement will hold up in real life, not just on signing day.
That's a uncomfortable exercise for many. Doing your budget. You don't realize how much you spend on some ridiculous things, myself included, right? But when you actually go through this exercise, you have to be clear on what was your lifestyle. Whether it is excessive or not is not the question, is what was it actually? And you can use your bank statements or the credit card history, which is, painful. I always say, go through a credit card statement, highlight everything pink, that's yours, blue, that's your spouse's, green, that's your children. It's the easy way to, I think, the easiest exercise to see what you're actually spending, because most people use their credit card. But then you can also think about it post-divorce. Which of those green or pink highlights can I get rid of to save money? But, you see it all the time when you're asking for support. You have to defend your numbers. So having that statement is actually defending your number. So if you're in this idle time, or you're in that distance space where you're waiting for something, make that an exercise that you do. Go through your statements and highlight what actually your expenses are.
Yeah. And this is one of the most tedious, painful exercises for a lot of people. But the process typically is, your attorney or mediator giving you a form packet of papers and say, fill this out. And you fill it out according to how you manage your household or how you believe your household is managed, which is often very different. The way you write those numbers, very different than how the courts look at those numbers in order of their priority or in order of their necessity. So our process does allow for us to go through the way you build it out, and then we can help you understand what line items may need to be reevaluated, moved to another category, or otherwise, so that you can best successfully defend those numbers, because they do matter. And once you put them out there, I know the attorneys say, and it's true, that the disclosures can be amended. However, courts and attorneys and your spouse can't unsee numbers you've already put out there. So it just makes it more difficult if right out of the gate we're not being as accurate and clear as possible. So step 4, compare settlement scenarios side by side. Keeping the house versus selling, different support structures, different asset allocations. You don't need perfect forecasting. You need to see the trade-offs before you commit. So many people in amicable situations commit even at the kitchen table, as we say. Well, I can agree that, I know that pension's very valuable to you, so I can agree to all these things. And, Catherine, can you talk about how we help clients have those discussions without committing, especially in the beginning?
Well, a good comment to always use is, listen, I'm not disagreeing with this, nor am I agreeing with it, but you're considering it. So, it's easy to say, okay, I want to keep the house, and what am I negotiating away for that? And you look at your spreadsheet with your spouse, and it looks like you're each getting an equal amount of money at the end of the day. But when you set that aside and you walk away, did you agree to that because you didn't want to ask follow-up questions to how that would look for your future? Did you agree to that based on just all the emotions in the room and it was just easier to do that? Did you agree to it because you're out, you're done, and you want the divorce to be over? You have to look at these scenarios and realize the impact of those decisions a year from now, 5 years from now. You don't need to know actual numbers, but you have to consider, what will your life look like if you negotiate away your retirement to keep a home? Do you really love the home that much? How old are you? Is it going to be setting you back years because you just gave away a earlier retirement? So think about why you're making these decisions. And I say have the conversations, but step aside and then come back if you still agree to it when you realize the impact to it.
Love that. Step 5, translate equal into equitable for real life. So this is, the approach in equitable distribution states. However, it's very common in community property states, as the attorneys tell us, for the courts to want to trend what is called just and fair. So it's important the equitable approach to the division of your assets and debts. Taxes, liquidity, risk, timing. These factors can make identical looking settlements produce very different long-term outcomes. Step 6, package everything so your legal team can actually use it. One of the biggest hidden costs in divorce is rebuilding the same financial work multiple times because it was never organized or it's not kept organized and updated as you navigate through the process. So, Catherine, let's talk about what makes a financial package useful for next steps, whether it's attorneys, mediators, or just finishing up a financial negotiation with your spouse.
Do you remember the one, the first word was going to be organization. Do you remember the one, gosh, this must have been almost 10 years ago. We spoke in Pennsylvania to a group about the value of organization, financial organization, not organizing your closet, although there is value, which I'm in the middle of doing that right now, to organizing your closet. But we talked about financial organization. And I can't recall because it was so long ago, but the amount of stress it takes off of your life to be financially organized is empowering. It is life-changing. And how many calls am I on with you, with attorneys and our client, and they ask for a document that we've already sent them and the client have sent them, but they can't locate it, and we pull it up in a matter of seconds. Well, you pull it up in a matter of seconds, the same document, and then you email it to them while we're on the call. And I feel so proud when we do that, and our client is so thankful when we do that, because it just takes the attorneys forever to find something, because that's not where they're focused. They're not focused on that. So being organized is probably the best gift. Financially organized is probably the best gift you can give yourself in divorce.
I so agree, because in complex divorces, which we find ourselves in most of the time, and frankly, what some people may think is a simple divorce can have some complex variables or factors that can be overwhelming. And so when you're in the midst of complex assets, and then interpretation by an attorney, interpretation by valuators, interpretation by your friends, your family, yourself, your spouse, all of that, if it's all organized in one place with the underlying data to support that and what it means to your marital estate, really does make a difference. I think that's exactly what you're saying.
I am.
Okay, so that's the list. Full inventory, verified documentation, real cash flow picture, scenario comparison and modeling, equity analysis, and a package you and your team can use. 6 steps, not easy, but doable. And that's exactly what the MDS Financial Portrait is built to do. So let's close with our core message. For this episode, and for the whole series, this 2-episode series, divorce is emotional. The consequences are financial. The biggest mistake in amicable divorces and contested ones alike is moving towards an agreement before the financial picture is complete, verified, and understood. So if you're in the middle of this and you feel pressure to rush, that's actually the moment to slow down. I don't know how many times I'll tell a client, look, this is not an emergency. And the relief in that moment is priceless, because you do have time to think things through. Close the financial clarity gap, build the inventory, verify the numbers, model your options before you sign. If this series was helpful, please share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe to the WeChat Divorce podcast, leave us a review, and if you want a clear next step, grab our Before You Sign checklist, which will be attached in the show notes, or schedule an assessment call by visiting mydivorcesolution.com.
And remember, the goal isn't just to be divorced. The goal is to be financially stable after divorce. And remind yourself that financial clarity isn't the opposite of moving forward. It's what makes moving forward sustainable.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of We Chat Divorce. We hope this episode was informative and supportive on your divorce journey. If you're looking for more support for navigating divorce with confidence and clarity, head over to mydivorcesolution.com for more podcast episodes, divorce events, and resources for your divorce. We'll see you back here for our next episode.